CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: more Greek islands issue evacuation orders for thousands of people as the country battles devastating wildfires. We'll be reporting from Rhodes. Our other headlines: Israel's parliament approves Prime Minister Netanyahu's controversial legal reforms, despite some of the biggest protests in the country's history, and a walkout by the opposition. Election stalemate in Spain. The country fails to produce a decisive winner, raising the prospect of another election. And cruise control for Germany, who put 6 past Morocco, and a Borges hat-trick gets Brazil off to a winning start. The Greek islands of Corfu and Evia are the latest to issue evacuation orders as the country grapples with devastating wildfires and sweltering temperatures. Fires on the island of Rhodes remain out of control, forcing the mass evacuation of thousands of tourists and local people. Our correspondent Paul Barber reports.
Fleeing the inferno. These tourists trudging to safety on Corfu as the Greek island becomes the latest to order the evacuation of residents and holidaymakers. And this is what they're escaping from, a line of fire approaching the usually bustling coastline. The local government began sea departures overnight, with many tourists forced to spend the night in shelters and at the airport. Nearby Rhodes ordered its biggest evacuation ever over the weekend. 19,000 people moved to safety, many of them British tourists who were able to get home on repatriation flights put on by tour operators.
Well, close up it looked like hell on earth, to be honest. And, you know, there's a lot of fire. But I just hope everybody's okay.
It was really bad. We got out on Saturday night and it was carnage at the airport. And then we got put in a evacuation centre in Rhodes Island, and then no real kind of idea what was going on.
The deadly heat wave has seen temperatures over the past week exceed 40 degrees Celsius in many parts of Greece. Along with Rhodes and Corfu, emergency services are battling flames on the island of Evia, and 2 forest fires fanned by strong winds are raging to the west of Athens on the mainland. Some residents say they feel abandoned.
The fire spread around lunchtime. As you can see, everything is burnt. Houses are burnt. Our local officials were nowhere to be seen. Only one helicopter dropped water once.
As smoke continues to billow over the beaches of Rhodes, there's no end in sight. Conditions are forecast to persist in the coming days, and officials say the threat of further fires is high in almost every region of the country. Wildfires aren't unusual here during summer months, but climate change has taken it to a far more dangerous level. Paul Barber, CGTN.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Rhodes. Evangelo, what's the latest where you are? What's going on?
Well, I'm currently in the village called Asclepio, an area that was evacuated a few hours ago because the fires literally went through the upper part of the village, burning a number of houses, a lot of dead animals as well. We were here earlier in the day, and we were also told to leave because the place had to be evacuated. Right now, a number of villages had to be evacuated. Even our hotel, the one that we're staying, even 20 kilometers from where the fire front was, we had to evacuate because the fire was traveling so fast because of the gust winds that are up to 150 kilometers an hour. There's a number of people who had to find safety, but a lot of people also lost their houses, their businesses. And the people right behind me, as you can see, these are the guys who are the last guards pretty much of any resurgence of the fire that might be happening, because with these high winds right now, everybody's expecting a new resurgence, and there is a little bit of smoke in the background, and that's what most of the people are worried about. It's not only here, we're talking about a front of over 30 kilometers long, and it's the 6th or 7th day that the fire is burning, and with these winds not having any end in sight, everybody is very concerned of what tomorrow and the day after might look like.
Obviously, this is having an effect on tourism. It's being watched around the world, but it's also presumably having an impact on local people who live there and their businesses.
Well, we've seen those images on social media of the 19 or 20,000 tourists that were evacuated with the scenes of them carrying their suitcases. We saw some of the tourists being evacuated today onto buses or even onto pickup trucks. But it's not also it's not only the tourism industry that has been affected, because the island does rely heavily on tourism, but also agricultural. The island produces a lot of olives, olive oil, and a lot of people live from that. And we went around to see how much the devastation was, and we did speak to some of the people that are permanent residents and others that were born and raised here. And they were clearly angry with the situation, saying that it could have been prevented. Let's have a listen to what they said.
You know, all the tourists, they are protected, sorry to say that. They have water and everything and so on. They left a mess on the beach. All my friends, I don't know, nothing. I'm just scared.
All those that are part of the local authorities, they have different opinions. They blame each other, and in the end there is no one left to blame. The truth is that all of them are at fault. If you don't create fire zones from the beginning, this is what is going to happen. Look now, everything is burning and it won't stop.
And that's what most of the people that we spoke to, or people just passing by on the side of the road, are saying, that this could have been prevented. Of course, they cannot change the weather, meaning that they cannot change these high winds. But what they could have done was, before these winds picked up, they could have made those fire breaks. They could have cleaned areas of any debris that could have perhaps catch on fire. And that's what everybody's saying. And they're pointing the finger to the local authorities of not doing the prevention that they should have done a few weeks or months ago to prevent this wildfire from spreading. And what they're saying now is, like, there's no turning back. The fire is only going to stop when it reaches the sea.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Rhodes. Israel's parliament has voted through a controversial new law which significantly curbs the powers of the country's Supreme Court. Opposition lawmakers staged a walkout in protest against the legislation submitted by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right government. Outside the Knesset, thousands of demonstrators, angry at the judicial overhaul, blocked roads and clashed with the police. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stephanie Fried, in Tel Aviv. Stephanie, so what does this now mean for Israel?
In short, Jamie, it essentially means that the courts, the higher courts, the lower courts, their powers have been curtailed. And it means that the governing government, the coalition, can overrule the courts. And that's what was the concern of all these people here behind me. And by the way, Jamie, this is spontaneous. This has happened now within half an hour of this bill passing into law. These people showed up here on the street and they are blocking. This is a main thoroughfare in Tel Aviv. And this is the nucleus of the protest movement, has been for more than 6 months. It's a state of emergency is being called by protesters, telling people to get to the streets, and that's what we're seeing here. So what's going to happen is more laws will be passed. And that's the concern of the protesters. More laws that, again, will curtail the powers of the courts and of the judicial system, giving the government more power to enact laws and to put people, let's say, convicted people with records, criminal records, into positions, ministerial positions. And that was the concern all along. Jamie?
Protests against this change to the law have lasted for months and months. So has anyone compromised?
They've tried. Certainly, we were hearing last ditch up until 15 minutes before the vote actually started, we were hearing that there were attempts from both sides to reach some sort of compromise. It fell through, and now we have, this is the result. Yes, and there have been appeals to Prime Minister Netanyahu from heads of state, from former heads of the Mossad, military chiefs. President Biden twice in 1 week appealed to Prime Minister Netanyahu to back off, to not let this vote go through. It's not happening. I talked to someone here when this started and people were starting to take to the streets, and I said, so now that these laws are starting to go into effect, what card do you have in your deck? Now what card is the protest movement going to play? He said, civil war. Jamie.
Stephanie, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv. Spain is in political deadlock after the first election in nearly 4 years proved inconclusive. The close-run contest could now see the country return to the polls later this year, as both the left and the right scramble to secure enough seats to try to form a coalition government. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports now from Madrid.
A traumatic night in Spanish politics that left more questions than answers. The headquarters of the Partido Popular were prepared for a big night of celebrations. The centre-right party were predicted to race into government with the help of the far-right Vox party. That didn't happen. While the PP won the most votes, they fell short of the 176 seats needed to form a coalition with their hardline partners. Vox underperformed and lost nearly a third of the seats they won last time out. As the results poured in, it became increasingly clear that Pedro Sanchez and his Socialist Workers' Party PSOE fared better than expected, marginally improving their position compared to 2019. The left-wing platform Sumar, which encompasses a dozen parties, gained a 12% share of the vote, giving the acting government strong support but not enough to get them over the line. Experts believe this election has given a clear sign of the changing political landscape in Spain.
People had become a little bit scary of the extremes, and now there is a movement towards a centripetal movement towards the center. All right, now so voters are actually starting to make sense of all this like crazy scenario with the polarization, and they are moving towards the center, and that's good news probably for democracy, and not to play on the extremes as much as we have been playing until now.
With a hung parliament increasingly likely, weeks of negotiations will now be needed to see if either side can garner enough support from smaller regional parties to form a coalition. Right now, there doesn't appear to be a clear path ahead for the right or the left to form a government. Brussels will have kept a close watch on Sunday night's elections. Spain currently holds the 6-month rotating presidency of the EU, and they will be keen to see an established coalition formed at the earliest possible stage. Congress won't reconvene until mid-August, where both sides will seek to garner enough support to form a coalition government, putting their prime minister candidates forward in a vote. If they fail to vote in a winner, then 2 months later, Spain will once again go to the polls. Ken Brown, CGTN, Madrid.
Ken, it looks like Spain is heading for a prolonged period of political uncertainty. So what does that mean for the economy?
Well, Jamie, uncertainty seems to be the only certainty right now, but this isn't the first time this has happened. You only have to look back to 2019, or 2015 election, in fact. By 2019, when Pedro Sanchez was eventually elected Prime Minister, Spain had had 4 elections. Now, a similar period of instability would be really bad for Spanish people, for the Spanish economy. Right now, Spain holds the EU rotating presidency, and they have billions of euros of the EU COVID fund that they need to spend. The entire direction of the country is at stake. Which way will they go? Will it be with the socialists and their progressive policies, raising minimum wage, taxing windfall bank and energy company profits to bring inflation under control? Or will we swing to the right, who are talking about cutting taxes, cutting public
public services like health and education to try and get debt under control. So two starkly different propositions for the country. Right now, all we really have, like I say, are complexity, uncertainty, and a certain amount of political instability, Jamie.
Ken, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Madrid. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Russia widens its aerial bombardment of Ukrainian grain facilities as Moscow accuses Kyiv of drone attacks.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. More Greek islands issue evacuation orders for thousands of people as the country battles devastating wildfires. Our other headlines: Israel's parliament approves Prime Minister Netanyahu's controversial judicial reforms despite some of the biggest protests in the country's history, and a walkout by the opposition. And election stalemate in Spain. The country fails to produce a decisive winner, raising the prospect of another election. There have been more attacks on Ukraine's port cities a week after the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. Kyiv says several people were injured in Russian strikes that destroyed grain warehouses on the Danube River. In Odessa, at least one person was killed and 20 others injured in an attack on Sunday. The governor of Ukraine's Odessa region says Russia is trying to block exports of Ukrainian grain to global markets. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military says it's pushing back against Russian forces in the south and east of the country. Ukrainian troops are advancing towards the cities of Melitopol and Berdyansk near the Azov Sea. Battles are also ongoing near the eastern city of Bakhmut. Russian authorities say a Ukrainian drone attack has hit an ammunition depot in Crimea. The blast stopped traffic on a major highway and a railway crossing the Black Sea Peninsula. Several nearby villages were evacuated. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Isabel Nakira in Moscow. Isabel, what's Russia's reaction to the latest attacks in Crimea?
Russian President Vladimir Putin has labeled the attack a terrorist act and also said it was a very cruel and senseless act since the bridge had not been used by them for months to supply, defense forces in their defense forces in Ukraine. The Minister of Defense has also said that Ukraine attempted to attack the Crimea using 17 drones, but Russia intercepted it using their air defense system. 11 of the drones were crashed in the Black Sea, while 3 fell on the Crimea territory, while 3 others were destroyed. And of course, some villages were evacuated, and the bridge had to come to a standstill. Traffic had to come to a standstill for some time temporarily. But later on, the traffic flow resumed and everything is moving smoothly now.
There's also been a drone attack in Moscow. What more do we know?
Yes, Moscow woke up to drone attacks at as early as 4 a.m. in the morning, said the mayor of Moscow. We do understand that the defense forces intercepted the drones, 2 drones before they crashed, and 2 of them fell just near the defense building. There were no injuries that were recorded, but some non-residential buildings got some damages. We think that these are retaliatory attacks from Ukraine, especially after the Odessa attack city, and Ukraine probably is just trying to, tell Moscow that we can as well come as close as the Moscow city and in the center of Moscow. We understand that the attack at the Odessa city was affected. The cathedral, the Orthodox cathedral, was destroyed, and Ukraine is particularly angry about this and is keen to strike back. Over the weekend, Ukraine President Zelensky vowed he would respond back, and probably this is one of them, and it's a warning that probably in the near future it could attack the city center once again.
Isabel, thank you for that. Our correspondent Isabel Nakira in Moscow. The concrete roof of a school gymnasium has collapsed in China, killing at least 11 people. Many of the victims are believed to be female volleyball players who were training in the building in Qiqihar City. The authorities say the illegal stacking of materials on the roof may have caused it to collapse. An investigation is underway, and managers in charge of the construction company have been taken into custody. At least 15 people are dead after a ferry capsized near Indonesia's Sulawesi Island, west of the capital, Jakarta. 33 other passengers were rescued, and a search is underway for those missing. The ferry was taking people on a 1-kilometre journey between 2 small towns, which normally takes about 20 minutes. Sudan's civil war has passed the 100-day mark, with over 19 million people in the country facing food insecurity. That's according to the United Nations World Food Programme. The conflict has caused widespread power outages and water shortages, and it's estimated half the population are in need of humanitarian aid. Mediation efforts have so far failed to bring an end to the fighting.
The humanitarian situation is really dire in Sudan. Currently, there are over 19 million people who are food insecure, and this situation is expected to get worse as the war continues. WFP is highly concerned, especially for areas like West Darfur, where it's currently inaccessible for our humanitarian services to reach the people who need it the most.
China's senior diplomat Wang Yi is in Johannesburg meeting his BRICS counterparts from Brazil, Russia, India and South Africa. The gathering is in preparation for a major summit of the economic grouping in August. CGTN's correspondent Sumitra Naidu is in Johannesburg. Sumitra, what's the major focus of this meeting?
Well, this is the 13th meeting of the BRICS National Security Advisors. It's an annual meeting usually held ahead of the BRICS Summit. It will form part of the preparations for that upcoming BRICS Heads of State and Government Summit that's expected to take place here at the end of August, on the 22nd of August. Now, there's been a number of different BRICS meetings amongst the various groupings that have been underway in the last few months. Most recently, the Foreign Ministers meeting was held in Cape Town, and the BRICS Youth Summit in Durban, all focusing on cooperation, political dialogue, employment and labour issues, as well as sustainable development. Now, Wang Yi, one of China's most senior diplomats diplomats arrived in Africa this past weekend. He's, of course, already met with leaders in Ethiopia and Kenya. He arrived in South Africa last night and has been meeting with his counterparts today. He's already held some bilateral talks with his counterparts following his meeting with India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval. He said that China and India are two major forces in the process of multipolarization. He reiterated that China and India are not at odds with each other, that there's no threat to each other. Much of the sentiment was echoed by Doval, who said that India is willing to work with China in the spirit of mutual understanding. Of course, he also made some comments about cybersecurity, very important, putting forward some proposals for the cybersecurity agenda, and of course talking about cybersecurity being a national concern. Now, the National Security Advisors meeting will continue tomorrow, and diplomats are expected to deliberate on how BRICS member countries can effectively address traditional and non-traditional security threats in, of course, a coordinated manner, enhance solidarity and coordinate development for its member countries and beyond.
Sumitra, thank you for that. CGTN's correspondent Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg. Football, and Ari Borges scored a hat-trick as Brazil got off to a winning start at the World Cup, beating Panama 4-0. Panama are playing at their first finals and went behind after 19 minutes, with Borges then going on to become only the fourth Brazilian woman to score a World Cup hat-trick. Brazil has featured at every tournament, but are yet to get their hands on the World Cup trophy. They play France next. Germany secured the biggest win of this tournament so far, beating debutants Morocco by 6-0. Alexandra Popp scored twice for the two-time world champions. But it was still a historic day for Morocco, who became the first Arab team to play a match at the Women's World Cup. And Italy beat Argentina 1-0 in Group G. Substitute Cristiana Girelli headed in the only goal in the 87th minute. Next up for Italy, it's Sweden, while Argentina face South Africa. The Saudi Arabian football club Al Hilal have reportedly made a world record bid of over $330 million to sign France captain Kylian Mbappe from Paris Saint-Germain. He's out of contract next year and has been left out of the French side's pre-season tour of Japan after refusing to extend his deal. Al Hilal also approached Lionel Messi after his PSG contract expired, offering him a deal worth $500 million a year. But he opted to join MLS team Inter Miami instead. The current world record fee is the $256 million that PSG paid for Neymar in 2017. The headlines again. More Greek islands issue evacuation orders for thousands of people as the country battles devastating wildfires. Our other headlines: Israel's parliament approves Prime Minister Netanyahu's controversial legal reforms despite some of the biggest protests in the country's history, and a walkout by the opposition. And an election stalemate in Spain. The country fails to produce a decisive winner, raising the prospect of another election. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
This is